Welcome back to the Sustainable Summit Week. And we thank Dean Al Brown for opening the session for us around sustainable energy, which then will kickstart the discussions that will be led by our facilitator, Valerie Gien, who's the National Coordinator of the Economic Empowerment of Women in Green Industry from UNIDO. So, Valerie, thank you very much for joining us, and also to all your panelists who you will be introducing. We definitely look forward to a rigorous discussion around a roadmap for South Africa's energy transition. So we're looking forward to that. Over to you, Valerie. Thank you.
Thank you, Tabang. Good afternoon. Can anyone hear me? I just need to do a sound check. Can you all hear me? You can. All right, good afternoon to you, ladies and gentlemen, and to my fellow panelists. I'm aware that not everyone was listening in to Dean, so just for the sake of continuity, I thought it would be useful just to give a quick summary of a few points that Dean made, and then introduce the panel, because I think the expectation that Dean has set is for our two panels to respond to some of the points that he made or the scene that he has set. So first of all, thank you to Dean for the presentation and for the involvement of Old Mutual Alternative Investments. I'm keen to know more about alternative investments, probably from our first speaker, Sean. But I think what Dean did was give us a nice soundbite of what Old Mutual Alternative Investments is doing in Africa, and it's quite a lot of interesting and significant work. But I think amongst the points that he highlighted that I think our panelists would need to take note of is that we need to think about this road ahead, which this panel is going to be talking about. We need to think about it in a systems way. So I'm hoping that each of our panelists will, from wherever they come, think of how they add to the puzzle from a systems perspective. And he was also defining what sustainable energy meant. And in essence, he highlighted a whole life cycle approach to defining sustainable energy, from sourcing right until the end, and hopefully reuse of products. And of course, he had lots of questions about the what's, what now, how, and when, and who. And that brought us also to the topic of how will we mobilize around this? How will we mobilize around securing sustainable energy? Who needs to be involved? When? How? And what will the measurements be? And he also spoke about the road has shifted. The climate change expectations have changed. But of course, what we've also introduced into this discussion is how much has the pandemic changed, which is a change for us to actually now need to think with a bit of a crystal lens into what goes into the future of solving the problem of sustainable energy. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce you then to our very esteemed panel of speakers. I think they come with a nice blend of what we needing to know, both based on the experience and the qualifications and skills. And Sean, who is our first speaker from Old Mutual, is an investment portfolio. I just need to get your title right. But anyway, you do have all the, and I'd like perhaps Sean to just further introduce himself. But Sean, you come with an investment background. And I think that investment money is always what we're looking for, especially in these tough times. And I think based on both your past experience as well as what the future looks like, we'll be keen to know what the investment appetites are going to be based on past experience and future projections as far as taking us forward in this road ahead. And then we have as our next speaker, Barry Bremkum. Now, Barry has described himself as a struggle veteran. And I kind of think I can attest to that. But of course, his official title is General Manager at Sanedi. But he definitely is a struggle veteran. If there's one person I've known who's done it all in the field of energy efficiency, it's Barry. And I hardly think there's anyone who doesn't know Barry. And Barry and I go a long way back. I remember my first job in the energy efficiency space The best memory I had was Barry calling me up about a week or two into my job and saying, come, we've got a ticket for you to go to Denmark, so that I could practically go and learn about energy efficiency and renewable energy. And of course, he's done many things subsequent to that. Our next speaker then is someone who's newly joined the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, Blanche Ting, and she is the coordinator for energy and low carbon for UNIDO, and working, I think, on some exciting new projects that UNIDO is hoping to be putting forward into the future. And you will find probably quite a preponderance of us from UNIDO. I myself am sitting in this role from UNIDO, which again is the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. And Blanche has also worked for government. And so I'm sure between her government experience, her UNIDO experience, and her recent PhD on just energy transitions will add value to our discussion. And then last but certainly not least is Faith. Faith is a project manager for the Industrial Energy Efficiency Project, which has been running for about 6 years now. It's been sponsored by UNIDO, but really driven by the Department of Trade and Industry and Competition, as well as the Department of Energy. And I'm very pleased to say that this project has recently won an international award. That's the Association of Energy Engineers, a very prestigious award, as well as where it links back to me and the work that I'm currently doing. One of the things that I've heard is that what made this project stand out, apart from all the savings and wonderful work that has been done in the energy efficiency space, has also been about the fact that they looked very closely at gender mainstreaming. And this is an interesting and important point to mention, especially since I heard the Minister of Tourism mentioning in closing on her speech that she wished she could see more women in the space of tourism. Well, I think in the energy space, that's part of my job, is to see how much more can we see women. And I certainly look forward to our panel talking about that wherever you can pick up on it. What are the hows and the whats that we need to consider in making sure that we see more visibility and meaningful participation of women in this space? But I guess I'm not here to do all the talking. I'm going to be listening and helping unpack a few questions. I do have some questions I've shared with the panelists, but of course, you, the audience out there, are also welcome to put on the chat box the questions you'd like to have answered by our various speakers. So Sean, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Valerie. Same thing, sound check, wave your hands or something if you can't hear me. Okay, I'm a chief investment officer at Old Mutual, alternatives in the infrastructure space, and that's in respect of our SADC assets, which predominantly South Africa. So I'm glad Dean gave more of a Pan-African picture. I'll tend to focus on the South African context, which I think is possibly more relevant to the audience, but there are parallels, obviously. So yeah, look, I think if I can give you a quick answer to one of your questions, which is the investment potential. Obviously, we see the energy sector, the electricity sector in particular, as being a highly investable sector, and that's not just for us at say at an institutional level or a utility type level. The key piece to sustainability, I think, is this genuine democratization of the investment opportunity. So you talk about women being, how do you get women involved? Forget how do you get women involved? How do you get rural women involved? How do you devolve this generation to municipalities, to corporates, to farmers, and that actually I think the democratization of our power sector goes hand in hand with sustainability, and as an allied goal, I think it's also, that is the just transition effect, which is the creation of new jobs, and as I say, this devolution of the investment opportunity to all levels of society. So it may sound a little bit a little bit ambitious for someone in my position, but I think that we do have global experience around complementary investment in the power sector. So the German renewables experience was in many respects driven by quite small projects, and European renewables development quite generally as a result of land constraints, etc. It tended to involve quite small sites. It was almost on more of a cooperative type basis at certain levels, and then you obviously also had utilities, very large utilities emerge in that space. So there really is the transition, the energy system of the future does involve everything from households with a few panels on their roof, achieving an investment return via savings, as I say, through to rural landowners that or municipalities that have the potential to generate. So that's the democratization. So what's holding back democratization? I think there, in terms of what we're going to do in terms of generation, we've got a planned mix that in our South African way we've put together a very good plan, and it's logical and it's balanced and it makes sense. We haven't quite figured out exactly who's going to build what needs to be built. It could be entirely centrally procured through SOEs, Eskom as an ongoing monopoly. I think that would miss a big opportunity set in terms of that locks us into a utility scale model only. It creates some level of inefficiency there. At a household level, we know that there is a business case in terms of transmission savings, in terms of grid support, in terms of literally just democratizing the capital allocation. We can either sort of follow almost a Swedish type model of we pay more tax and then we effectively allocate more resources via central government, or we can create investment opportunities, at a national scale, and we can try crowd in capital from below, and it's that enabling environment in terms of allowing more capital to come from more diverse sources that I think will make our power sector more robust. It'll lead to increasing supply beyond the capability of government to run programs. Government's doing a fantastic job in terms of running utility scale programs, but can you imagine if we had the IPP office deciding whether you can put 3 kilowatts on your roof? It's just you can't. The scale the scale of what we need to do is so significant. We need to replace 10,000 megawatts of coal, and that needs to be replaced by 30 to 40,000 megawatts of renewables, and that needs to be done in the next 10 years. You're talking, it's a national challenge. You don't solve a national challenge like that by picking one SOE and, again, with all due respect, one department that's, in the Department of Energy and saying to them, go ahead, guys, solve a national crisis. You don't tackle, it's a crisis on the scale of, well, not a crisis. It's a good crisis, let me say. It's an opportunity for a transition on the scale of, that we haven't seen in this country before. So look, I'll leave it there. I think if I could just sum up on those key points, I think there is a lot of opportunity, as I say, for the expansion. And the key, sorry, the one piece that I haven't mentioned is I think the independent system market operator that's been contemplated. I think that is the key. I think we don't want, deregulation can lead to market failures. It can lead to haves and have-nots. We do not want an energy system that means that Anglo-American receive extremely cheap, reliable power, and the municipality of Puerto de Chava doesn't. And absent a central buyer, my fear is that that is what would happen on a pure bilateral market. The municipalities are not able to procure engineering services at the moment because they don't have the skill set. A central buyer would alleviate that problem. It would collectivize risk in the system. There are defaults in the system. There are losses in the system. A central buyer is able to absorb those. But generally speaking, it's a very healthy market. 200 billion rand a year comes into Eskom's collection department. That revenue collecting machine could be moved to a central buyer, and then the central buyer becomes that source of the ultimate democracy. So if anybody wants to sell power, they can use power themselves. But if they want to sell power, they can sell it to that level playing field, being the independent buyer. And we make it easy, we make it accessible, and there's your just transition, and there's sustainability. So, thank you. I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you, Sean. I think you made some very interesting points that I'm looking forward to the rest of our panel picking up on. And Barry, I've already introduced you as a veteran, so I think you've seen done that and so on. But in a way, I guess we're calling upon you to also put your crystal ball for us, because you've been part of the journey of the past. And now, as we're trying to fashion our way into the future, please tell us your thoughts.
Yes, thank you, Valerie. And you can see by all these grey hairs that I am a veteran, but thank you very much for the opportunity, and good afternoon to everyone. Yeah, so thanks very much for the opportunity to be part of this deliberation. And, if someone asked the question last year, this time, how would the energy landscape, or how would the landscape in general look in the world at the end of 2020, who would have thought we would be in the situation where we are, where we're busy doing this conference online and not in person at a venue. So it's very difficult to predict things in the future. But I was giving this some thought, and when I was asked to speak on this panel, and I was also asked by someone the other day, also, given the current situation and the drive towards a post-COVID economic stimulus package, there's going to be a lot of things happening, and politically, socially, as well as in the energy space. And so my sort of 2 cents worth, giving it some thought, was that over the next year, and some of them might roll over to more than the next year, some of the things we implement on the energy side are not short-term things. They're definitely more medium to longer-term things. But to tap onto what Sean said, I think, given the current developments around the Constitutional Court ruling allowing for municipalities in good standing to procure power from IPPs, given the fact that Bit Window 5 has been announced by the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, and also all the regulations and legislation that has changed around self-generation, whether it be commercial, industrial, or mining customers, even residential customers, has definitely bode well for a stimulus package around the development of renewable energy projects. So that will go from small scale to large scale. So I believe that in the next year, we'll see a lot happening in this space. We'll see a lot of municipalities, and we've already seen Granny and others come on board saying that they want to start looking at procurement of power from IPPs. I think you're going to see a lot of the larger customers going off grid, and that in itself has good environmental impacts. It has good impacts in terms of quality of supply, as well as sustainability of supply or security of supply. But it does have an impact on the national utility in terms of revenue, because the more people are going off the grid, the less revenue there is, and obviously Eskom sitting with billions of rands of debt that has to be paid. But be that as it may, if we do the calculations and you model the impacts on all the role players, I think the move towards renewables and the just transition that everyone's talking about is definitely one that is good for everyone concerned. So, I saw an article this morning in Mining Weekly, and some of you might have seen it. It was a headline article saying the transition to green can make the mining industry in South Africa the darling for investors again. So mines, for example, traditionally have a bad track record of leaving mines after the end of use in a dilapidated state. Although there is funds for rehabilitation, we very seldom see rehabilitation. If you look at some of the old gold mines in the Gauteng area on the West Rand and so on, these, once they've been mined out, the developers, there's no more interest and there's no more investment, and they leave the mines in a terrible state. But this article went on to say, if the mines start embracing green technologies and the whole move towards green energy, green resources, not only energy, but in the way they use other resources as well, that could start attracting investors again, which we've seen a slight downward trend now because of the cost of commodities as well as various other factors in South Africa. So I think there's going to be a great move towards renewable energy across the board, and I think that is definitely going to probably be top of mind in the next year as well as the following years. I do believe we will see, and it's coupled to the drive towards renewable energy, is a bigger focus on demand side energy or energy efficiency, as we note, because it just makes perfect sense to first downscale what you're doing and optimize your energy consumption or the demand side, so that when you spec your renewable energy installation, that you can spec it correctly and smaller and cheaper. So, if you're wasting energy and you have to design a PV system around a building, let's say, where the energy has been wasted, you need X amount of panels to cover the roof space. Could cost you a lot of money in capital. And at some point, you might then become energy efficient, and that could be a stranded investment unless you're able to sell the surplus capacity back into the grid. But it does make sense to look at the demand side first, and the International Energy Agency has for the last number of years, and is still now in their latest report, referring to energy efficiency as the first fuel. So we need to do a lot more around energy efficiency, and I think this is going to come to the fore. There is a lot of drivers in this space. The carbon tax, which is pushing people to look at ways of saving energy and to reduce their carbon footprint, which came into effect in 2019, and their first tax assessment year is now in 2020. At the end of October, they had to submit their first tax returns on the carbon tax. And I think that's been a wake-up call where people could actually physically see the impact they've made and feel it in their pockets. I think you're going to see a lot more on the energy efficiency side. And the carrot is still there. The 12L tax incentives for energy efficiency are still there. And there's many other projects, donor-funded projects around energy efficiency that are going to make sure that this still remains top of mind and that it is aligned to the drive for renewable energy. So I do believe that energy efficiency in the government space is going to pick up a lot of momentum. I think you're going to see in municipal space, because municipalities just cannot keep the lights burning. They're going to have to do things around their street lighting networks, wastewater treatment plants, their own buildings. And I believe you're going to see a lot of change there, because also, barring everything else, the price of electricity is increasing drastically, and people will just have to look at alternatives to save energy in order to actually have access to energy going forward. So energy efficiency and renewable energy coupled, I think we're going to see big strides in 2021 and beyond. Then the other very new thing, which is a buzzword in the whole energy space now, and if you read the literature, the momentum this is picking up is very difficult to keep track on. I find it probably on a par with the developments that we saw when cell phones were first introduced, and that's the whole drive around the hydrogen economy. We're just seeing a lot of government investment in that, and South Africa has a particular vested interest in that. We produce 95% of the world's platinum, and which is one of the core ingredients for hydrogen fuel cells. So if hydrogen does pick up in fuel cells specifically for energy generation, it picks up the momentum that it's going to certainly do, because we've seen this happening throughout the world. Then we provide a lot more opportunities for our platinum miners, and also at the same time provide a green solution, because they're even talking about green hydrogen and not hydrogen per se. So the Department of Science and Innovation has invested a lot of money in research into hydrogen fuel cells. We've seen all the large motor manufacturers investing money in developing, in going beyond just purely electric vehicles and looking at hydrogen vehicles, and some of these are commercially available already. And then we saw a big development last week where Anglo announced that they will be looking, especially in their open cast mining applications, they'll be looking at converting their diesel fueled, these large trucks that are used in open mining, that they're doing some pilot sites around converting them to hydrogen as well. So the hydrogen fuel technology and fuel cells in South Africa and around the world is going to be really big news. It has good impacts for the industry. It has good impacts for the environment. Although slightly expensive at this stage, I do believe over time, like we've seen with renewable technologies in the likes of PV and wind, that the costs will come down quite drastically, and we're going to see a lot more transition to hydrogen, because besides the energy and environmental benefits, we just take one example. We saw the announcement by Siemens a few weeks ago, announced the first prototype hydrogen run train. Now, that sounds great, hydrogen train. We've got hydrogen vehicles, but what other benefits does it offer? And if you take the current situation we have with our metro rails, and there's been a lot of hype in the media over the last week around that, is a lot of our metro trains are just unable to run anymore because of cable theft. So the main lines in Cape Town 1 and 2, as well as the third main line in Gauteng, is basically at 90% unavailability, because the cables are just being stolen in broad daylight. If you have something like a hydrogen fuel train, you don't need cables, you have less opportunity for vandalism, and that will improve the quality of lives of people, commuters who need the trains for transport purposes. So these are the added benefits that you can see as one example, but there are many around the hydrogen economy. Then second last that I'd just like to touch on, and this is also really picking up momentum in Europe as well as the USA, is the whole transition to a digital technology. Now, digitalization in energy efficiency has become one of the newest buzzwords. It gets a bit complicated, so some people shy away from it. But the fact that technology is going to play a bigger role in the way and we use energy and other resources is unfathomable. It's just every day the technologies are being developed, and we're talking about daily technology development, not annual or every 5 years, whereby more and more devices are becoming enabled, 5G enabled, and will be connected by devices like your cell phones and so on, in order to operate, in order to get your bill, in order to communicate with your utility, in order to control whether it be your lighting systems, your air conditioning system, will all be done digitally going forward. And a lot of this is already happening. If you take how we use Bluetooth to use our phones via our radios in our cars and many other systems. So bringing all those digital technologies together into a digital plan, let's call it that for the lack of a better word, for energy efficiency in South Africa, and a lot of work has been done by the IEA, and then the big multinationals who work in this area, like your Siemens's and Schneiders and so on, are doing a lot of work in the background around that. So the digital technology, I think this time it's for real. I think it's going to happen. I think we're going to see major strides in our country next year. And we as SANEDI have got some really exciting plans around that, to working together with the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy. But this is groundbreaking work, and it is pretty new. So you'll probably see us reaping the rewards of this work probably in a 2 or 3 year window going forward. Then last but not least from my side, I think we're going to see a lot more awareness around energy in general, We have the next COP conference due to be held in London in November next year. They're already doing phenomenal work in terms of publicizing it, in terms of funding projects around the world to be able to showcase at COP in London next year. I think you're going to see a lot more media coverage around the transition to those points that I've just mentioned above, the renewables, the energy efficiency, digitalization, hydrogen, and so on. So I think from an awareness point of view, we are going to become more familiar with the concept of clean energy, sustainable energy, however we want to coin that phrase. But it's basically about using less energy going forward, improving the environment, and at the end of the day, saving money. So the awareness part, I think, is something that is going to go way beyond what we just see with Eskom every now and then, putting a power alert and saying switch off your swimming pool pumps, your lighting, and non-essential items because we're in a critical situation. I think you're going to see more solutions-based communication going forward from suppliers, from manufacturers, from utilities, from international donors, and I think Eskom as a utility will probably also be doing something more around that. I know Sanedi will definitely, and he's busy planning and budgeting to do something more spectacular around that space. So that's pretty much how I see the short to medium term future in the industrial, commercial, residential energy. I think we are in for exciting times, and I think that anyone who is in the energy space will be able to really participate more meaningfully. I think we'll create a lot more jobs, and then the work around the just transition in the areas like Mpumalanga and others, I think are just going to get so much support from government that we are going to be in a good space, those of us who are involved in the energy industry right now. Thank you very much for that opportunity.
Thank you very much, Barry. I think a lot of food for thoughts, and I have some questions in mind already linking between yourself and Sean in terms of what you've said, but I'll save them for later if our next two panelists don't address them. But maybe just what stands out for me based on what you said, Barry, was the question of just how nimble are we? You mentioned a lot about how much is happening and how much change is happening. And I think in the same way, Sean talked about a whole democratization that's necessary. And a question that perhaps I'm already preempting for the panelists, those coming up and those who've spoken, is just how nimble are we? How ready are we? What is it going to take for us to jump up and take advantage and snatch those opportunities? And I guess behind that is how do we overcome the challenges that might hold us back? But I'll save that for later if our next two panelists don't help us, because I think Blanche and Faith, you work a lot also in the implementation space, which speaks to the hows and the whats and the whom needs to be involved. So Blanche, over to you.
Thanks very much, Valerie, and thanks to the organizers for this opportunity. So I feel that fellow panelists have said a lot already, so hopefully I can also align to what they've said. So so let me make 3 points in this brief discussion of mine. I will start a bit more high level, so something I need to add, especially on the just transitions, I guess, some things that I think could be missing in the discussion. So I guess my first point would be to say that, we need to embrace complexity. I think in the brief of this panel, we talked about the COVID times, what will happen post-pandemic. But I think what I'd like to say is that inevitably we're living in a modern world where many systems are interrelated complex systems. So for example, we have cities, interconnections of provision of energy, mobility, food, health, etc., financial systems as well. So the reason why I think this is important to bring up is because with this interrelated systems, it could also be vulnerable to systemic threats. So I think there was I think Val, you said in the beginning, what is systems change? I think with systemic threats, it can also be quite difficult to solve, because if we have one disruption in one area, that could also prompt cascading damages in another. So these systemic threats, for example, we have COVID, which is rapid, abrupt, and shocked, as well as also small changes, which is gradual stress over time. And this, of course, we can have an example here as climate change. But you have many of these different systemic threats that are coming together that are really pushing our society into, different thinking of new ways of doing things. So with this vulnerability, we need to also look at, especially in South Africa, this, I think Val, you mentioned something about how nimble are we? But we also need to take into consideration the structural inertia as well that leads to these vulnerabilities. So of course, in South Africa, we have these triple challenges: unemployment, inequality, poverty reduction. So these are the kinds of things as well that we need to take into consideration. So the reason why I'm bringing this all up is because often when we have a pandemic like COVID or other systemic threats, at least from the policy responses or the governance responses, is often these top-down kind of approaches and very techno-managerial solutions. So it places privilege on scientific and statistic models, so trying to quantify the risks into quantifiable probabilities. So the reason why I'm bringing this up is because often top-down approaches are very short-sighted. And in reality, if we are going to have more systemic threats in the future, it's very difficult to predict. We might not even fully understand what this pandemic is beyond financial, beyond technical. There's also the societal implications. So that's my first point, is to say, let's embrace this complexity, and also to suggest that embrace the uncertainty, embrace the complexity, and rather look at, besides looking at threats, we also need to see how the system is actually capacitated enough to be able to absorb, withstand, as well as recover these systemic threats. And so that leads to my second point, is because we're really talking about just energy transition. So this is, I think, what is missing in the discussion is about the societal aspects. So in terms of innovation, there's questions about renewable energy. How do we introduce renewable energy in the context of a coal-based economy? So I think the second point I'd like to say is that technological choices are not neutral. So we can't have these deterministic ideas that if we introduce innovation, it will lead to economic development. I think we need to be a bit more agnostic and say, how does the technology introduced into society actually leads to inclusion? It leads to more people participating in the economy. So it's also about the societal aspects. So I guess my second point would be that besides the techno-economic dimensions, technologies, markets, finance, infrastructure, the social side is often neglected. So of course, we talk about norms, mindsets, beliefs, systems, discourses, social practices. So the reason why I bring all this up is because onto my third point, I think Barry and the previous speaker also said about the 3Ds. For me, the 3Ds is decentralization, democratization, and of course, digitalization. So if we are talking about renewable energy, we're talking about generation of electricity closer to where it is consumed, then we're actually talking about a completely different system. So at the moment, the electricity is all about base load. It's all about centralized generation. But if we are going towards bidirectional flow of electricity, where we have customers now engaging in the load, in the demand of electricity, and hopefully be able in the future to sell the electricity or excess electricity, we really can't ignore the fact that we're now changing into engaged consumers, also looking at stochastic generation, so distributed energy resources, small scale embedded generation. So the load itself is going to be quite stochastic. We can't, predict how people are going to engage with their electricity. And of course, Barry talked about digitalization, so smart meters, automation, real-time data. So all of these are new technologies, and it comes back to how are the consumers going to engage with this new technology, because it's absolutely different to what we have now, which is centralized baseload. So in terms of democratization, we can't ignore the fact that a just energy transition has to be inclusive. So if we're looking at past systems, it's a bit more exclusionary, because we need to look at how people are able to afford this new electricity or new types of tariffs, new kinds of technologies. So how do we bring marginalized people, for example, in the rural areas? How do we make sure that they are part of this transition? So it has to be inclusive. And I think my last point would be to say that we can't ignore the consumer side. So consumer choices have value. they're no longer passive. It's a transactive energy. And of course, who's actually going to be involved in this transition? We talk about municipalities now. Do they have the capacity to be able to be part of the system? And so I guess my last point would be that the social side cannot be ignored. We can't ignore it. It cannot be disassociated from the technological choices. So often it's so limiting to just say, let's introduce technology. We need to be a bit more nuance in our thinking beyond the technological dimensions, but also the social side. If we are going to decentralize, it's going to be bringing the technology closer to people, and especially engaging with this new technology. So I guess that's very brief, but that's about it.
Thank you very much, Blanche. Brief but very substantive, I think. I think you've added very nicely to perhaps additional questions as well that would sit on the back of our two previous presentations. And bearing in mind that our topic is about fashioning the road ahead, all the buzzwords that you've used, or the keywords that all of you have used, are going to be keywords for us to ponder on further. I like your use of the word embrace complexity. It's like this person has become a friend, they're here to stay. How are we going to deal with this new friend? And the friend is not going to go away anytime soon, and they might even become more complex. So it's not something that the human being, I think, likes to hear that much. So I'm also relying on you as clever people here to tell us a little bit towards the end about how do we embrace something that seems so complex, when quite often maybe the human brain can only deal with one or two things at a time. And, I know from my own experience that when we approach companies on things like energy efficiency, you spoke to them about price and lowering price of energy, and then that got but when you spoke about climate change and this and that, it was quite complicated. So it's a good point for us to come back to as well if we have time. Faith, are you online? I know you're online, but we cannot see you. Are you able to show up, Faith? Thank you very much. Great. We're happy to look at your face there.
That I've been getting a warning to say that my signal is unstable. Yes, so I didn't want to risk getting shut off completely. So I said, let them hear my voice, even if they don't see my face. I'll keep trying though. Okay. So yes, thank you so much. And thank you for really inviting me to this panel. My passion about industrial energy efficiency. Like you said, the industrial efficiency project, which really most people are still around. Really, when we started in 2011, it was simply because as a effort, and we cannot do nothing about that. There are people such as Barry who've been doing a lot for that energy efficiency become about the waste that we're actually paying for. So that focuses on industry and commercial buildings. And over the past, let me say, 10 years or so, we've been able to, well, first it was actually a huge battle. I mean, you had to convince people, first of all, to bring the service that we're offering. As you know, our services are highly subsidized. So we had to convince them first to accept the services. And then what we were getting out of it was a case study to demonstrate what. That's all in the past, because we get a good response now, and we've actually stopped all the recruitment drives. And companies are pretty straightforward about what they want. They understand the implications of doing nothing about it. They're all positives that we bring as the IEE project. I mean, the award, and thank you for the acknowledgement, Val, that is simply because we've been able to assist organizations in South Africa to save up to 6.5 terawatt hours of energy. And for those of you that cannot quite articulate that, that is plus minus 5.3 billion rands. And when we do our tally up and work out, we find that that is equivalent to 5 years of ESCOM load shedding. So wow. A lot of energy that we've been able to assist organizations to save. thing about the IEE project is right from the start, we knew that we wanted to leave a cadre of experts. So we have a lot of training that we do almost on a daily basis. We're doing some training, and the beautiful thing about that training, we've trained over 500 delegates and over 200 energy management systems to different energy systems optimization, such as power, back and chillers. And the nice thing is that since 2016 to date, when we look at increased as well. Training, there were very few women. I'd be the only one or a few other consultants who were women. And so that is heartwarming for us, but also for UNIDO, because they were very intentional. They knew that the face of energy. And I think slowly but surely, through the Industrial Energy Efficiency Project, we've been able to do that. So we've played, or we are playing our part in transforming the face of energy. In policy advocacy, I mean, some of and industry doesn't really understand how to implement them, how to comply with such regulations and policies. So we also play a role in informing government, but also making it easy for them to comply with them. We've also played a huge role when it comes to making sure that most of the things that we've done are not just when life is good, but also in times such as this. I mean, the pandemic, nobody could have ever. So what with the organizations, as you know, that most organizations in South Africa are making sure that they either appoint or have one of the engineers appointed as an energy manager. So that is also very interesting for us, because we're saying that the typical role of an energy manager, as you know, will be to coordinate activities around.
Faye, losing you a bit. Hello, Faye. Faith, I can't hear you.
Val, can you hear me?
Yes, you back?
Is that better? Oh, yes. Gosh, this connection. I'm so sorry about that. Okay, so I was saying that one of the things that the Industrial Energy Efficiency Project aimed to do was to see companies take matters of energy efficiency seriously, so much so that they appoint energy managers or energy champions to obviously champion their energy efficiency plans and strategies. And then when we come to assist to go through these energy managers and energy champions, we train them up, we hold their hand where necessary, and we help them implement some of their projects in the process. So now, post-COVID, we're saying now also realize that the traditional role of an energy manager is not enough. They also have to, to have the ability to adapt to disruptions such as, the COVID pandemic or any other force majeure. So that's been interesting for us. We've been getting a lot of great responses. But most of the things that I'd like to note and really share is that absolutely every organization is fully aware that for any company to recover post COVID, they need energy. And what we've been trying to do as a project is just to make sure that they understand that economic growth or economic recovery does not equal increase in CO2 emissions. And so we're glad that most of the companies are aware of this and they are focusing on it. And with our help, they are really taking issues of energy efficiency very seriously. Some of the companies are saying we actually need, our sense of urgency. Now we have a sense of urgency when it comes to energy efficiency matters, because we want to change the thinking amongst our staff, but we also want to make sure that we start with what we call low-hanging fruit and low-cost options, because money is just not enough to go on a drive for bigger projects. So these are just some of the great responses that we've been getting post-COVID, and we're available. We've been doing a lot of training online. Obviously, expert level training is a practical component in an industrial plant, So we can't do that part online, but a lot of our theoretical training we've been conducting online, and the response has been fantastic. The other thing that we've been doing online is we partnered with South African Bureau of Standards, and we've been hosting ISO 50001 workshops to make sure that industry still, besides the pandemic, are still ready, and should they opt to go for ISO 50001, they have all the necessary information and support to be able to do that. So the question around what the future looks like, I'm hoping, like Barry, that the future is going to be more around, as far as energy is concerned, more around energy efficiency, because there's still a lot that's been wasted, and also renewable energy. So if we could marry the two, because most companies ask me, so if I just focus on solar PV or biogas, then I don't have to worry about energy efficiency. And it's that kind of misconception that really frustrates me. But I also take it as a responsibility to make sure that we raise awareness that even if you are using renewable energy, you still have to make sure that you use it in the most energy efficient manner as well. So efficiency will then have to translate to renewable energy also. But if we can marry the two, without a doubt, I believe that there are plenty of opportunities in South Africa. I mean, if you think about the potential for solar PV and of course bio-waste, which will obviously be a dual solution, obviously the renewable part of it, but also help us with the wastage. I'm also hoping that most companies will consider going for ISO 50001, especially larger organizations, the global players, because this has become a global standard. So if you're going to compete globally, this will become your public declaration of commitment to energy efficiency, but also of your continual efforts to save energy and reduce CO2 emission. So this is, hopefully this kind of package is something that most organizations will be able to adopt and run with. But more than anything, if there's ever a time to really equip your staff, your energy managers, I think the time is now. Make sure that they get all the necessary skills and all the support going forward, because you want to be ready for anything. The future is inevitable, and we've got to be prepared for it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Faith. I think you've touched on an important point that also links back to Blanche's points about society. And I guess that's about our skills and our capabilities to take on and adjust to change. So I would probably like to come back to you as probably a closing point to say, how have you seen people's behavior change? How have you seen people react to something that in the beginning was very new to them? My own recollection of energy managers early in, I think in 2006, when we were still introducing energy efficiency, was that people weren't even trained in that area. They had to, the seats of their pants quite often. But I'd like to then go back to the whole panel. And Sean, maybe this question is for you, because when I saw investor, I thought, okay, great. Everyone's looking for money and equity and so on. But, given what everyone has said around systems, uncertainty, all these words that can lie heavy on, what from an investment point of view would you say is the way to tackle uncertainty? Because I remember when we first introduced climate change in South Africa, people did not like the word uncertainty. They said, show me the numbers. So from an investor point of view, how comfortable are you with uncertainty and with the whole idea of complexity and being nimble on the feet, as I said earlier?
Yeah, I think Blanche had the key points there. We should embrace complexity. So coming from an insurance company, a life insurance company in particular, any actuary will tell you, I'm terrified to insure one person, the life of one person, but give me a whole population, and the bigger the better. The larger the numbers, the more predictable the numbers are. So there's a joke about a Soviet central planner going to London in the 1950s and saying, who plans the delivery of bread to London? And their answer is nobody. There's top-down regulation, and there are some big strokes in terms of making sure a market works. But at the end of the day, an economy is made up of thousands and millions of individual transactions taking place. So if we create the right incentives, and the right regulation, there's a thousand, there's millions of rational participants in our economy that will contribute. So okay, so that's the planning picture. So then if you create if a level playing field is created, and a market, now let's compare the energy market. This is me as an investor to the property market. There's no central regulator of office space that says there must be. There's building regulations. You have to build at a certain type. There's town planning regulations. It's not a regulation-free environment, but there's vast opportunity for utility scale, listed property funds like Growth Point that builds 100,000 square meter buildings. But there's also people in Soweto who rent out back rooms. That is a market. That's a democratized market, as I'm trying to explain, and that is an extremely deep pool of capital at all levels of society. And some people make money buying a house, some people don't. There's swings and roundabouts in the market, but it's on the whole, it's an enormous investment opportunity at a societal level. And and if we want to create economic growth, this is what we need. We need to have active participants in our economy, not one state provider of all property, and we all just sit around complaining that there isn't enough property. That's a bizarre scenario. So I'm with Blanche on this one.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sean. Time is unfortunately catching up with us, so I'm going to ask, instead of we don't have too much time to have further discussion, but I will say that I think from all your inputs, you've really tied into each other's presentations very nicely. But I'd like then, having listened to each other, and if you've considered the different views expressed amongst your co-panelists, may I ask you, the remainder of you, to just make a closing comment on some of the questions I've already thrown out, and they go back to what Dean presented at the beginning. How, who, what, how are we going to manage this complexity? The road ahead, what are going to be the ingredients? So if you can just take a quick stab at one or two key points that you'd like to leave behind our audience as to, beyond, over and above what you've said and having listened to each other, what are the one or two nuggets of intelligent thought you'd like to leave behind for us as the road ahead? Blanche?
How much time do I have, Val?
Not much.
I guess I would say experimentation, because we can't have some sort of blanket business models for, let's say, a national implementation. So, for example, if we look at Mpumalanga, who's looking at coal transitions, that could be some sort of sandbox that you could come up with new ways of doing things, but it may not be applicable to different regions like Northern Cape. So I think policymakers or people really need to be more embracing experimentation, because there are new ways of doing things. And unfortunately, it will take some time for people to embrace this complexity, as you said, but you can do it in bite sizes. You don't have to do it in wholesale change. So experimentation is key, because there's going to be different ways of doing things in different regions, provinces. So I think if we can get to that point where people are starting to feel that this old way of doing things is just not sufficient, so perhaps experimentation could be one of those things. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks very much, Blanche. Barry? I don't see you, Barry. Okay.
Thank you. I would just like to say that if one of the good things coming from this whole COVID experience, if anything can be regarded as good, is the fact that we have learned to be nimble. We have found out that government can process and publish regulations very quickly. You know, we're talking about 48-hour turnaround times. We've showed that it is possible. We've showed that it's possible that we can be innovative, and we've been able to be innovative. Life has still gone on. Business has still happened, and we've had a good impact by having less cars on the road, people traveling. We've had a huge positive impact on the environment. So a lot of things are happening. I think I'm positive coming out of this post-COVID situation, if we can call it post-COVID yet, because the numbers are going up. But I think everything bodes well for us to actually be able to do things in a lot faster way, and all the stuff needs to be underwritten by legislation. And I think we have proven to ourselves that this is possible. And I'm positive going forward that we're going to see in the year ahead and thereafter some huge strides in the way we do things and the way we consume electricity or energy, not only electricity. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Barry. And then lastly and not least, again, Faith, you know, you've walked a long journey. We can see you finally. Welcome. You've walked a long journey with people, working with all kinds of people, and with big business in particular, I think. So I'm keen to know, you know, do you see opportunity in the space for us to bring a whole lot more smaller players of business? But generally, your final thoughts on the way forward.
Absolutely, I do see plenty of potential, but I think we've got to start somewhere, because I just want to quote one of the companies, one of the big organizations that we work with, and they said returning to work means that the pressure to reduce costs and carbon footprint continues to mount, and the reduced revenue due to the lockdown has increased the priority level for low-cost or low-cost energy efficiency projects. This is an email to me to say we need your help as in yesterday. So it's heartwarming, and also this is my job. But when this tells me that the industry is full of people who are converted, so I don't have to walk around like I did before in 2011 and 2012 trying to get people to conform and convert their thinking. But if you are really serious about energy efficiency as an organization, at the very least, start with having an energy efficiency strategy. You are working towards something, so you need to put it down, and so you can be accountable for it later on.
Thank you very much. And if I may just add one last thing, which is always close to my heart, and that's the issue of leadership. I think that leadership doesn't reside just at the top. I always argue that each of us have the capability to be leaders in our own space. And I think leadership, as in ethical leadership that wants to do the right thing amongst all of us, should assist us a long way in terms of achieving that euphoric road ahead that we'd like to see for sustainable energy. So to my panelists, I'd like to thank you all for taking the time, your preparation, and your willingness to participate. I hope, unfortunately, the sad thing about our virtual world, we can't see our audience, so I'll clap on their behalf, all of you. And I hope that those who have joined us have gotten something out of it. And I think you'll see our details on the program. So if you're interested in anything that any of our speakers have to say, please be in touch. And I hope that we are at least a publication of sorts that will come out for you to get more sense of what was discussed in the session. Thank you so much and have a great day. And I'm going to be sticking around for this panel. Thank you all.
Thank you.